Hello everyone, I'm bringing you another recommended reading video today. I haven't made a book review for a little while and I thought it was about time I did, and I've been going through my books recently. I actually read to Robert. I read them out loud for my own pleasure, but read to Robert. Obviously he has no idea what I'm talking about at this stage, but I think it's nevertheless good for him and he seems to enjoy it. So the topic we're covering here is another George Forty title, the book we're going to have a look at, and it's called The First Victory, and this deals with General O'Connor's campaign in the desert against the Italians in 1940-41. Before the involvement of the Africa Corps. It's an often overlooked and quite interesting period, and really it was a period of victory against the Italians. The Germans, one of the reasons obviously for the deployment of the Africa Corps to North Africa was because of the poor showing of the Italians. There were some exceptions to that, of course. Some Italian troops were better than others, but by and large the Italian army in North Africa didn't put in a good showing for itself. It's quite an interesting period from that perspective. Obviously much smaller British forces, nevertheless managing to prevail over very large Italian forces which were in the area at the time. So the book deals with that in some detail. It's got lots of photographs and deals with sort of formations and so forth, the structure of Italian and British formations. So from that point of view, quite an interesting reference work, and that's what we're going to have a look at now. So here we have The First Victory, General O'Connor's Desert Triumph, December 1940 to February 1941, by George Forty. Quite a striking front cover here. We have an Italian propaganda poster, top right here, photograph at the bottom showing British cruiser and light tanks in the desert. And then on the back cover we have another Italian propaganda poster, rather like this one, certainly indicative of Mussolini's ambitions at the time, and a captured Italian tank at the bottom here with, I believe, Australian forces, and Australians would actually press these into service in the desert, interestingly. We'll have a look inside, the contents now. Redoubtable Matilda II there, and more Italian tanks here, as you can see, more captured Italian tanks. So, I have the contents here. A brief chronology, which is useful, gives you a brief rundown of exactly what happened in chronological order prior to looking at it all in a bit more detail. The road to war in the desert, which gives a lot of background information, the disposition prior to war breaking out in the desert. The Italian armed forces gives a nice breakdown of naval, air and land forces. The same for British and Commonwealth forces. Early operations, the war at sea in the Eastern Mediterranean, of course, very important. The control of the Mediterranean was key to the operations in North Africa. Operation Compass, war in the air, the Aussies take Bardia, Tobruk and on to Derna, and the destruction of an army. So we'll have a look through in brief. I won't stop on every page, but we'll have a flick through some of the details here, primarily looking at photographs and diagrams, of course. There's not opportunity here to run over the text for any great detail, but hopefully you'll get an idea and a flavour of what's in this book and whether it's something you'd like to add to your library if you don't have it. So we have, again, another Italian propaganda poster there, some excellent photographs of Italian operations, various vehicles and so forth are covered in some detail in this as well. Here we have the brief chronology, which again you can pause and have a look at this if you'd like to, but it's quite useful having that there. It just gives an idea of exactly the chronological order of events, basically, before looking at them in more detail, as I say. And you have Road to War in the Desert here, which deals with, obviously, preceding events and preceding dispositions in the desert. We have Haile Selassie here, of course, the Emperor of Ethiopia, and obviously the events there prior to war breaking out in the desert, sort of key to understanding the political background to what was going on at the time. And obviously details of Mussolini's rise to power in sort of, not in detail, but enough to understand what was going on, his ambitions and so forth. And that's all sort of covered in some detail here, just to give a background to what was going on. Obviously British deployments and forces in the region prior to the outbreak of war is covered to a degree as well. We have all that covered there. We then move into sort of the meat of what the book is discussing, which is the battle, the war in the desert at this time, and the opposing forces are covered here in two sections. So we have the Italian armed forces detailed here, and you have here the Struttura del Comando Supremo in 1940, which gives you the structure of the Italian High Command there, as you can see. And then we have details of naval forces here. We have some detail of air forces as well. And again, some interesting tables here with facts and figures from the period. Some nice photographs and illustrations as well. We have here an illustration of a typical Italian soldier of the time, top right. And this section basically deals with that sort of information. Vehicles and so forth are covered in some detail as well. This is an interesting diagram. It shows the structure of an Italian infantry division, which is useful in terms of comparing to British doctrine and British organisation at the time. More detail on vehicles here. Obviously tends to be in broad strokes. You don't get a huge amount of technical detail on an individual vehicle or anything of that nature. That's not what the book's about, but it does give enough information to sort of understand some of the tactical as well as the strategic aims and operations of the Italian army at the time. And the photographs are well captioned as well, does provide a lot of information. So we move on to the British Commonwealth Armed Forces section here, and again naval forces are dealt with to a degree. Obviously we have commanders there, naval forces, and again some interesting tables with facts and figures. Air forces here as well, and then land forces, which includes again details of vehicles and formations and so forth, so quite useful from that point of view. You see this here, obviously British Commonwealth forces, British Empire forces. There was quite a variety of troops involved in the Desert War at this time. You can see that in the photographs here. We'll keep flicking through. Again, more tables of the organisation of the 7th Armoured Division, November 1940. Nice diagram there, quite useful. And again, more information on guns, vehicles and so forth. You can see here. So early operations deals with the early operations in the desert, of course. Nice illustration there of a Rolls-Royce armoured car, which featured in early operations in the desert around this time. And some good aerial photographs in here as well, showing sort of forts and encampments and so forth, which is quite interesting. And see how they were sort of laid out at the time. And again, primarily pausing and looking at photographs here. Nice photograph of a crew of a light tank brewing up, as you can see there. And the Italian advance into Egypt, nicely laid out in the diagram top right here, as you can see. As mentioned, lots of interesting diagrams and photographs and so forth recreated in this or produced for this. The war the war at sea in the Eastern Mediterranean is interesting and obviously key to the land operations as well in terms of resupply, obviously control of or a good enough control of the Mediterranean was necessary for resupply and so forth. And obviously to try and prevent, each side was trying to prevent resupply by sea as well, of course, so key to understand. The raid on Taranto, very famous, of course, using swordfish, torpedo bombers, which we have here on the right-hand side in this photograph. All quite interesting. Some fantastic photographs reproduced in here, as you can see. And a nice chart here of naval operations in progress, 27th November 1940. So again, it does give a good breakdown of what was going on at the time in chronological order, gives good illustrations to show what was going on, and plenty of interesting photographs to show the forces involved at the time, as you can see. Operation Compass, so this is preparing for the British attack, details of preparing for the attack. Just first of all, as you see here, it was supposed to be a 5-day raid. Of course, it ended up being a lot more than that. Ended up evolving into something much more than that. But you can see here the British armour, which was in use at the time, Matilda II featuring prominently, and ongoing details, the order of the battle for Operation Compass, which can be seen here. So it's nice, broken down with core troops, 7th Armoured Division. You've got the 4th Indian Division and various other details there, as you can see. So that's nice to have. All this information can be found online, of course, but it's nice to have it in a book like this if you're interested in this era of the Second World War. And we have the capture of Sidi Barrani here, nicely laid out in a diagram, top right there. And we have, again, more photographs, plenty of photographs throughout this book, which again is typical of a George Forty book. They tend to be very well illustrated with photographs, diagrams and so forth. We then move on to War in the Air, and this is an area I'm less familiar with, even having read the book. I have to revisit this chapter at some point, but again, we'll just have a flick through and you can see the photographs, the illustrations and so forth in here. through. And the Aussies take Bardia. Now this is an interesting part of the war in the desert at the time, and again covered in good detail in the text here. Again, superb photographs and diagrams as we have here. The taking of Bardia by the 6th Australian Division. And you can see that there clearly illustrated. I'll just speed along a little bit with this. I don't want to take too much time flicking through, but hopefully you're getting an idea of just the sheer number of photographs and so forth included within here, as well as the excellent text. Tobruk and on to Derma. So this is interesting. Matilda II crossing, basically not fantastic hill climbers, so they were assisted by Scammell recovery vehicles as you have here, and you can see that. Yes, so it was to avoid, I'm rereading the caption here because I remember reading about this previously, it was to avoid wear and tear on the steering and obviously the drivetrain and the engine itself as well. So interesting point there. And again, illustrated with an interesting photograph. And I mentioned Australian use of captured Italian tanks, and you can see that here. The M11 and the M13 medium tanks were used by Australian troops, conspicuously marked with kangaroos to stop them from being shot up by Commonwealth troops. And further photographs and illustrations here. Looking through. The Battle of Beda Fom, again shown with an interesting diagram here. Nicely shows deployment of troops and so forth. Fantastic photograph that. I've seen this previously, but nicely reproduced here with the large Italian flag flying from a British light tank. And basically we come to the end here and we have a sort of closing section showing a lot of captured material resulting from the operations at the time. So bibliography at the back, obviously, which gives further reading if required, and useful index if you're looking for anything specific there. So typical of these George 40 books, this is a very nice one and deals with an interesting period of the war, which is perhaps not as well known about as other eras during the war, even the later desert campaigns. So I highly recommend this, well worth getting. We spent a little bit more time flicking through this than I'd initially intended because there are so many good photographs and so forth to have a look at. So there it is. We've had a quick look through this, and hopefully this has been useful, and hopefully will inform your decision whether to buy this or not. So I hope you found it interesting looking at this. I certainly find it to be a very interesting reference book of an era of the war which is not particularly, it was not at the forefront, let's say. There were a lot of areas of the war, Battle of France, obviously the Normandy landings and so forth, which were a lot more prevalent in people's minds. Even the Desert War later on against the Africa Corps with the Italians is a lot more talked about, a lot more well known than this initial war in the desert from 40 through 41. So quite interesting from that point of view, and it does cover it in some depth. Obviously lots of interesting photographs as we've seen. So as I say, I hope you found it interesting having a quick flick through this. If you have found this interesting and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or if you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you've hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as I always say, a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It really is greatly appreciated. As I always say, thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address in the description as well. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.